Incremental greetings. Today I want to speak about the case of MasterHowToLearn, a user who first started using Anki, then he switched our Supermemo fully transitioned to Supermemo after 5 years, and 4 years after that, he actually switched over to Obsidian with plugins. So let's cover his motivation because it's been a while. That was into 2022. This predates FSRS. So why he was motivated to do so, especially when he was covering Supermemo in his blog. I won't comment on the specifics about Obsidian, but I do for the Supermemo and Anki because I profoundly know those apps. So let's start. He used Anki for about 5 years after trying Supermemo. Nice. It was 2018, so that will be SM17. The SM18 was not yet released, and even less the SM19. That was just last year. Then, it's not that my case that, hey, I use Anki and Supermemo at the same time, but I divide the use case. That for me, language learning is Anki. For me, Anki is language learning, and Supermemo is something else, all of the incremental reading. Now, here is a full switchover. So he will have imported the flashcards and so on. Let's see. And by the way, let me slightly increase the size of the text. So yeah, he spent about 1,500 hours for less than 500,000 reviews. So yeah, could be that we could consider this above average. I would guess so. For instance, FSRS has data for about 20,000 collections, and I don't know how many million repetitions overall. But I remember that I did the math, and by average, each collection had 30-something or 40-something thousand repetitions. So you could interpret this as tenfold the average. And for me, again, I have more than tenfold this number. Even though that's not a metric to measure, it's not meaningful, It's just descriptive what you have done across years. But the point is that he invested quite a lot of time. It's not that, oh yeah, I will try this software for a while, and you know what, then I will move on to this other one, and so on. No. You have spent quite a lot of time. Nah, I will skip the stats are not relevant. He was still grateful, so even if he moved on, he will be forever grateful. I think this is true for many people, not just him. Okay, so turns out that he actually tried to use Supermemo 2 years before that. I think that's quite common, that usually people, they don't start to use Supermemo right off the bat. That there's some trial and error until perhaps you eventually are familiar enough with Supermemo. Now I get the incremental reading method and all of that. But if you don't reach this point, it's very likely you're not going to use it. Then he tried Supermemo 15. It was not the latest one. Why he decided this? I think because it was freeware. So yeah, it's a good thing you can do. Now, at the time of the recording, you also have the Supermemo 16 completely for free. Yes, the number one thing that people will say, oh, this looks terrible. And indeed, because it looks very old school, because Supermemo is as old as me. And yeah, he wanted to like changing the font, template, inserting media files and so on, and it was not as straightforward as could be in Anki. By the way, he didn't find anything online, only super long articles. Well, at least I have some videos that are more to the point. I hope this makes a difference. Has made a difference. So basically, UI, UX, and UI, friction points, and the complexity. Because Supermemo, usually people say, oh yeah, Anki they say, oh yeah, Anki is complex software. Well, now that I'm so versed in this niche of spaced repetition, incremental reading, and so on, Within this, Anki is very, very simple. If you compare it to a software like Supermemo, Anki is like a toy. It's there's no comparison. So even though, as a new user, if you don't know Anki or spaced repetition, Anki will have a learning curve and experience that in 2008 and 2009. But for Supermemo, that's even larger. So a person who is already familiar with spaced repetition through Anki will still have a very steep learning curve regardless. Then, cognitive dissonance. Yeah, that's the thing you will experience. That you think, yeah, Anki is the best or the one. And most people, because it's open source and it's popular, it's very likely it's the first one you will ever use or ever try. Exactly. So the popularity. Pre-made decks, even though it's possible to import all of this in Supermemo, is not straightforward. It's not just built-in, click here, click there, and I import an Anki deck, or stuff like this. And his favorite, the Anki subreddit, that there's a community. Now it's more than 100,000 people in the subreddit. You cannot compare this to Supermemo, but in the opposite perspective, that in Supermemo, the subreddit, it's close to dead. It's almost inactive. There's a Supermemo community in Discord, but it's very, very, very tiny, considered if we compare it against Anki. Just how many YouTube channels you will get covering Supermemo? 3 or 4 dedicated about it. And perhaps another channel, one-off video, here and there. How many videos you will see that they cover Anki? Even if the channel is not about Anki, they will cover it. Like for studying, cramming, exams, all of those sorts. In the hundreds, and for most common languages, you will find videos. Only the creator was defending his software. Well, this is too reductionist, but I got more or less the same impression in 2008 when I discovered Anki, that a lot of people were complaining in the Anki spectrum, in the Anki ecosystem, and it seemed like only only Piotr Wozniak from Supermemo was defending, no, that's the real deal, and so on. And it gives you this fallacy that because the majority of people are in one party, in one side, and it's very uneven, you will say, those are they are right. So even though he had this cognitive dissonance for 2 extra years, until he later decided to give it another shot. And that's the key factor. When I tried to use Supermemo, I didn't want to use it for real, or to even less to switch over. It's just, let's give it a shot, because I never did, because it was proprietary software. 2 main reasons why burning out in Anki and believing in the superiority of the scheduling algorithm. SM17, because back in the day was the latest one. So this second is, now it's not it still exists against FSRS. Basically there are no priorities. So you cannot move to the FSRS and expect the same behavior, because there are no priorities in Anki. But other than that, it's not as big, the gap is not as big as before, right? But why he was burning out in Anki? Let's find this out. Oh, nice. So the algorithm was one of the 2 factors, but was not definitive. So he needed something else to add more weight, to make this decision. Frustration with transfer of knowledge in Anki. I think I know what he means by that. Realizing the benefits of incremental reading. With this alone, you're sold. If your only interest is to use incremental reading, this already justifies to use Supermemo. Even in 2024, this holds true. It's just this. If we neglect everything else, it's still worth it. It's a really big deal. It's the deal in Supermemo. Then, why he was burning out, that was one of the first, and should I say the most important one, the important factor. Frustrated with the Anki settings, okay, and high review count, a lot of repetitions. Yeah, but this is actually a consequence of the second, right? If you had a better algorithm, you will have a lower review count overall, and this will create less burnout. Let's see what else is there, because yeah, the settings, but that doesn't seem that big of a deal. Let's see, more than 1,000 cards. So this could be true, especially in old days that in Anki you were using the SM2 adapted version. I experienced the same thing, by the way. The optimal setting, what happens is that in Anki, at least before FSRS, is that every card is treated exactly the same, regardless of the interest you have on that, the priority, the importance, how relevant it is. Everything is treated the same. Or some facts will be harder to remember than others. Inherently more complex, harder. This is not taken into account. Everything is treated the same, unless you do some trickery and you have different decks, and those decks have different settings. So let's say that I will do, Hanzi or Kanji for language learning. And I know this is more complex, it will be harder. So I put it in a deck that will have initial interval, lower initial ease, and all of that. Yes, that's one thing, but for me what's more important is that if you're archiving books, articles, just to keep track of what you read and in which point you have read, the right point, and all of that, it becomes a nightmare. It becomes a nightmare. More doesn't equal better and high retention. Absolutely. This may sound counterintuitive, but it's actually true. So let's say that I do care about one topic, and I have one deck for that topic, and I set a maximum interval. That is very common. And let's say I put half a year. So that means that the interval will grow from 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 4 months, and then 6 months. I successfully recall that 6 months. Successfully recall that 6 months. So it cannot grow anymore. And you will say, hey, this is better because I consider those flashcards to be super essential. I don't want to forget them. So I will make an artificial repetition a lot more condensed in time. And I will remember those better. Well, turns out that's actually not how the brain works. And you will do more repetitions, and this will eventually end up with a weaker recall. So actually, more, what I would say is that excessive repetitions, first, does not lead to a high retention, but actually lower. Actually lower. Yeah, okay. Counterintuitive, cool. Yeah, so his point is that he doesn't think that himself or any user is a key with enough knowledge or data to determine how to change any of the parameters. Yeah, well, at some degree with experience, for instance, after a decade, more or less you could have some heuristic approach that, if it's language learning, perhaps I did, let's say, Japanese. And then 10 years later, I start with Chinese. Those are the characters I did before, but are new. I will do some other mnemonic technique, all of that. But I have a hunch that I will use this setting or setting group, not the defaults, or the ones I have, let's say, for sentences. Or for English, because in English I'm already proficient. I'm already advanced. But that will always be very suboptimal, because you just go by feeling or by assumptions, not the real thing, right? So it's enough just to go through the decks, yes, if you don't have better tools, but it's not an optimal solution, and it will never be. If you use FSRS, now what could you do? Just go with the entire deck or the entire collection, and eventually the algorithm will adjust to your desired retention rate. So it's always long term. If I do the change today, I change the desired retention to 90% to, I don't know, 95 to match the default in Supermemo. This will take a while to have results. What he discovered with Anki settings. Yeah, in Supermemo you can customize individually by every single card in your collection the forgetting index. By default it's 10%. And even if you can modify the collection default, by the way, from 3 to 20%, you can individually say, oh, this flashcard will be 12, this will be 7, or whatever combination you want. He says 10 to 20, no, it's 3 to 20. I don't know if for other Supermemos it was just 10. I'm not sure about that, but at least for the last two versions was 3 to 20. And what you do is as you just trust the algorithm, because as human, this goes way above your scope. You cannot compute that in your brain. So it's not perfect, obviously, but it's good enough. It's good enough. And at the end of the day, in Supermemo, you can overwrite anything you want. The user has full control. Then he mentioned the introduction of, he mentioned the transfer of knowledge, something that was kind of a difficulty to do in Anki. So let's see what he meant by that. Yeah, then accessing this anytime and somehow string them together, and then you have it. So you could simplify that this will be the neural review. Of knowledge, you already know. You just activate the concept models, one after the another, spread activation, and then it's, hey, for the knowledge I already had in different stages in time, now that I put this together and I try to think about it, now I have a new insight. I have new knowledge from the knowledge I already have. This is possible in Supermemo because you have semantic review systems. In Anki, that's not. You can only do filtered review sessions with some criteria of the, I don't know, intervals, dates, quantity of repetitions, the decks or tags, and that's about it. Okay, so let's continue the frustration. So he built app frustration with the transfer of knowledge. Nice. Okay, this is especially common. That, hey, I'm able to recall the flashcards, especially if they are close deletions, by the way, but this doesn't transfer in real life when I want to apply that knowledge, right? How come this is possible? Well, depends on your approach, how you formulate those questions and answers, especially if they are close deletions. You'll be tempted to just do what's called syntactic close deletions. You just close one word, and you're able to complete that sentence, that phrase, or a statement, like in rote. But you don't make any meaningful effort and mental connections of the concepts in order to respond that question. Then yes, I also experienced that, by the way, for years. So knowing doesn't mean understanding. You can know something. You can, when I have this question, is this answer? That doesn't mean I understand it, or I know it, or I can apply it. And you could take this to the extreme, that I could be able to successfully recall the answer of a few thousand flashcards and never apply this in real life. Because they are very obscure knowledge that is very hard to have an opportunity to apply it, which is also the case, is also true. But because of how I do formulate those items. This is a soft skill, does not depend on the software. In his case, he used Anki. He could have used any other thing, by the way, Supermemo included, and experienced the same thing. This works a lot better with incremental reading, by the way. So you can see those holds, identify, hey, that's not helping me, and iterate on that. And in Anki will be a lot super isolated every time. You only have flashcards. You don't have anything else in Anki, so yeah. So a member, I don't know who that was, is however, I switched to using Supermemo, and after a while, I noticed a ton of connections being made. Yeah, the power of incremental reading. You can use concepts, the hooks, and make subset reviews, a lot of semantic connections and opportunities. Because you work from the source, and you distill the source incrementally to make it your own and decide what to remember. In Anki, that depends how you work. You will use other software in parallel, and Ankify. Usually, people will just go linearly from an article or book and Ankify that article or book. That is a very limited approach. One of the pros to use Supermemo, and in fact, the reason I tried Supermemo personally, because you build the big picture incrementally. Yep. So the big pro, we could summarize that is because of incremental reading. So I'm pretty sure whatever he is going to say now is for Supermemo, yeah, yes, but because of incremental reading. The method, not the tool that implements this method. Meaning that it's agnostic to the tool. If there was another software that implemented incremental reading for real, which to date there's no other one, it could be this will hold true. With Supermemo you can do interleaving, micro. At every single repetition you're gonna switch topics, and also because of the priorities you can sort the criteria that in Anki it's not possible. Today you have 200 flashcards due. You can review them by the deck 3 order or by their interval, due date, overdue, relative opportuneness, some other criteria that is not semantic. It doesn't make it's not that useful, to be honest. I'm going to skip what he mentions because it's true for incremental reading, so it doesn't depend on his case, on his specific individual case. So the summary is just this, that he realized the benefits of incremental reading. That's it. You have to use Supermemo and understand it, and understand how to use it well enough to see those benefits. That's why at the start of the video I said that, yeah, if you don't reach this point, you will just move on. I don't see those benefits. But because it's the user interface, it's too old, and the structure overall, the user experience, it's old school as well. If you're young, you have never experienced software in the 90s or even early 2000s, you'll have to put a lot of effort. Closing remarks. He never regretted the decision to switch over to Supermemo, even though 4 years later he moves on. I wholeheartedly believe that Supermemo serves me better than Anki. Yes, because of incremental reading. We could simplify that. Yeah, that was it. So now let me check the comments in Reddit. So that's the post. Then someone, deleted user, said that he was hesitant to believe the superiority of the algorithm. But I have a video on that. The comparison doesn't make sense. First, they are not the same app. Anki is just a flashcard app. Supermemo was born as a flashcard app, but then in the year 2000, it evolved to an incremental reading app. Yes, you're gonna still use it as just flashcards if you want. I know people who do that, but it's just, you are neglecting 99% of the sauce in the software. So if you neglect incremental reading, yes, now doesn't make much sense. Use Anki. If you use Supermemo, it's because of incremental reading. And yes, the UI is terrible, there are some bugs, yes, it's closed source, it's paid, even though you can use it for free. The 3 versions older of the main release, they are freeware. Yes, I do agree with that. Then Glutamate, he's very famous from his add-ons. He did in the past. Basically, what he says could be summarized as the same. That yes, I will have a better algorithm, but it will be diminishing returns. That just for a tiny increase, I lose a lot of perks that I can sync to the cloud and follow the standards and so on. And I do agree with the assumption that you use Supermemo as if it was Anki. Yes, I do agree. But again, there's no reason to use Supermemo with just flashcards. It's no longer built like that. For 2 decades, it has not built for that. It is built for incremental reading. But that is because Glutamate perhaps didn't try incremental reading at all. He only focused that, oh yeah, it's a flashcard app. No, it's not. Well, yes, it is, but it's a superset of that. It's a lot more than just a flashcard app. Exactly. And now this is true that some users in 2024, now because of FSRS, they do use Supermemo for incremental reading, but then when they go to create the flashcard, they create it in Anki. So they do all of the reading and the scheduling and interleaving all of that in Supermemo, but they don't review the flashcards there. So yeah, you can mix that. It's not all or nothing switch. Or as I do, that hey, whatever I do in Supermemo stays in Supermemo. I don't import anything to Anki. But I did at some point that, hey, I make this difference now that everything that is language, it goes to Anki. Once I have done this, now if I do language, I will go to Anki already. This could be true, for instance, if you want to use LaTeX, you could use Anki or Remnote or any other software instead of Supermemo. So you don't stop using one and use the next tool. You keep using both, but you divide your use case. Yeah, it has been naturally confirmed. It's very hard to do it. You may have seen some Reddit posts that saying that Anki is the same or even better than Supermemo because of the repetitions and so on. They have major flaws. I will cover this eventually in this channel. And at some point, and some of them I actually replied when they were published. So there are some limitations on that. I use both. I used Anki for 15 years and Supermemo for just 4, and the difference is massive. You without saying numbers, you will have a better retention rate. I think FSRS by default aims at 90, and Supermemo at 95. And you could say, hey, you just have 90 and 95. It's just 5% more. But this 5%, it's double. If you take the forgetting index, that is not linearly, by the way, it's not 100% minus the retention rate. This is double the improvement. It is 5%. It's a big, big deal. And you not only have a better retention rate, you achieve this by using fewer repetitions. First, assessing the timing of the repetition. Remember, more is not better, and usually even worse. So the timing when you are about to forget, this is super powerful. And second, because of the priorities. And then indirectly, because since you do incremental reading, you do your own flashcards, not someone else's that you import a shared deck, which this will affect the retention rate. Does Supermemo support LaTeX formula? Nope. TTS? Nope. Most of support multiple consolations? Not directly, but you can edit it if you want, but that's not something you will want actually. So I get that from Anki you want this feature, but actually it goes against you. So why? Why having a feature that it will lead to a lower performance in the long term? Okay, so I have a video on that. People confused. So this person, among many people who are not familiar with Supermemo, They think that Supermemo for Windows, the Incremental Reading app, is the same as the paid courses for language learning. No, it's a different software, having the same name. They are unrelated. When you buy Supermemo, you have Supermemo for life, at least that version. That release, if I buy Supermemo 19, I will have this for life. No subscriptions. And if I want, I could get newer license keys for the coming releases. But it's not pushed, and I know many people in Supermemo community that they don't use the latest release. They keep using SM18. They don't do any of those fish tactics like Apple to force you to upgrade, if that is your concern. And eventually, it will become free. When you have the 3 next releases, it becomes freeware, so you don't even have to pay, if that is your concern. Yeah, and this could introduce that, hey, yeah, in Anki you have the incremental reading add-on, and it's the same thing. No, it's not. And I'm going to explain this in this video, but it's absolutely not the case. Yeah, exactly. I abandoned them, some shared decks, because the materials were from high school. I never wanted to learn, nor did I have any desire to retain those informations. Yeah, that's one case that you use a spaced repetition tool for the school system, for basically cramming. You have an exam and an artificial need. You use this as a method to have a higher retention rate at some point in time, and that's it, and then you remove it. You delete it, you move on. And yeah, he converted the deck with repetition history, but with a very weird approach with spreadsheets, because he was not knowledgeable about the coding. With a Python script, you can achieve great results very easily. And I have the script. And then later, he wanted to move on, 4 years later. So I won't cover the Obsidian part, because I'm not that knowledgeable. I use it, but not at the same degree as Supermemo or Anki. But let's find out what it says about Supermemo. Zedalkassen. Okay. So far is the first time he mentions that. And yes, in Supermemo, you can do it, but it's way too laborious, too manual approach, too much friction. So even if it can be done, it's not worth it. And in my opinion, it's not. So I will suggest to not use Supermemo for this. So he wanted, because of the linking, basically. Yeah, Zettelkassen. So for him, this works better, and because he wants features of personal knowledge management that Supermemo does not offer. Why? Because Supermemo is a learning app. So at some degree, it will overlap, because you will have knowledge, and you have to manage the knowledge that you're processing or you're accumulating. Yes, but it's not a personal knowledge management app. The intention for the user is to learn, to acquire the knowledge, to be on your brain, not on the software. And the other was that he was a Linux user, and he was using a virtual box, a virtual machine, in order to use Supermemo. So at the end of the day, this outweigh the incremental reading for him. Even though he loses this in Obsidian, even using the incremental writing, spaced repetition, and so on. So at the end of the day, is what works for you. Go with that. If it's not pleasurable, it will become toxic eventually. So what is good for you? That you don't find the right tool for you, you can use different tools, a combination of tools. So that's the takeaway message, that not because the Supermemo user is very engaged for at least 4 years, and even bothers to talk about it and to share in detail in his blog and so on, that will continue to use it for life. That is like, it's like a relation that I will continue all my life. Not necessarily. And in his case, he didn't even need FSRS to make this change. So that was the case of MasterHowToLearn. and how he switched from and to Supermemo. Nothing but to add today, and see you incrementally.